About 2 months ago, my grandfather passed away. I inherited the property and decided to renovate the old house he and my grandmother had left behind. While cleaning out the attic, I accidentally discovered an old metal box hidden behind a beam. It was covered in dust, its edges rusted, as if it hadn't been touched for decades. The latch on the lid had long since failed, and it took some effort to pry it open. Inside were a few seemingly random old items: a tarnished military medal, a stack of yellowed documents, and an old photograph. Faded with AGE.I in the photo, my grandfather looked to be in his early 40s, with a serious expression, standing beside two unfamiliar men. All three of them were wearing vintage spacesuits. The background was a monotone gray, resembling the standard backdrop used in NASA photography. Yet, no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find any familiar NASA insignia anywhere in the image that he appeared to be about 40. And the photos seemed to have been taken in the 1970s. They were all in spacesuits. The backdrop looked like a standard NASA setting, but strangely, there wasn't a single NASA mark anywhere on the photo. The background was a dull, pale gray, and the mission patch on their chests read, "Explorer." I had no idea what this meant. My grandfather, an astronaut, why had he never mentioned it? And this Explorer mission, I'd never heard of it before. What kind of operation could be hidden so completely? The document at the bottom of the box provided the answer. Dear family, if you found these documents, then I suppose it's time to tell the truth. In 1972, I was not in Vietnam. This should never have been spoken aloud. But since you've seen these things, nothing really matters anymore. That year, a few pilots and I were selected for a top-secret space project. Our mission would remain unknown to the public, but the nation needed US. In 1972, the Soviets secretly deployed a satellite in lunar orbit. The White House knew nothing of its purpose, only telling us that it had crashed on the far side of the moon a few weeks prior for unknown reasons. The data it carried was assessed by superiors as extremely critical. The White House decided to send the three of us to the moon to retrieve its storage card. The operation was codenamed Explorer. Officially, the mission was announced as Apollo 18, but in reality, it was a complete cover-up. All equipment, flight windows, and even launch pad scheduling came from the original Apollo 18 plan. NASA was furious but powerless. On the surface, I was still serving in Vietnam. In reality, I was undergoing the harshest space training imaginable. Weeks later, we ascended the launch platform and gazed at the colossal rocket. Almost mythic in scale, it would carry us to the far side of the moon, a place no one had ever set foot on. I was the commander of this mission. Lieutenant Carver was in charge of the lunar module, and Lieutenant Ackerman controlled the command and service modules. From Earth to lunar orbit, the flight took 3 days. We performed multiple orbital passes. Every time we entered the moon's shadow, communications were completely cut off. Looking down at that lifeless planet through the viewport, I felt an indescribable sensation, a profound, overwhelming fear. The voice of Earth was cut off. Only silence, freezing cold, and the oppressive weightlessness remained. The far side of the moon was entirely unlike the images or footage you may have seen. There were no smooth, bright Maria. Only impact-scarred craters stretching densely to the horizon. It was a land long dead, as if the entire moon was being slowly devoured by the universe, leaving only an empty shell. We began our descent. Carver and I entered the lunar module to land, while Ackerman piloted the spacecraft in lunar orbit. Ackerman could communicate with Earth while on the near side of the moon and briefly talk to us when circling to the dark side. But at no point could we simultaneously maintain contact with both Earth and the orbiting spacecraft. He orbited every 2 hours. We only had a 35-minute window each time to communicate with him. Many believe the far side of the moon is always dark, but that's not true. There is daylight there. It just follows a rhythm entirely different from Earth's. The area we landed in was illuminated, the sunlight cold and harshly white. But calculations showed that in a few days, the area would fall into total darkness. We had to complete our mission before that. The moment we stepped out of the lunar module, an eerie silence enveloped us. Not even radio static remained, only the hiss of air in our helmets echoing repeatedly. I had intended to say something memorable, like the famous quotes from the Apollo missions, but Carver, ever the dull and rigid man, urged me to move quickly. We swiftly assembled the lunar rover, planted our flag beside the spacecraft, and set off toward the pre-designated satellite crash site. Hours later, we reached the target area, but the scene before us exceeded anything we could comprehend. The site was littered with footprints, not ours, and certainly not made by humans. The arrangement, rhythm, and angles of the prints were completely unlike those made by standard space boots. They looked chaotic, heavy, and unnatural, like they were left by beings unfamiliar with the moon's gravity. Even stranger, 2 clear drag marks extended across the lunar dust, stretching into the featureless wasteland beyond, and the storage card, originally in place, was gone. Someone had been here before us and taken it. We immediately reported the situation to the orbiting spacecraft. Just within the communication window, Ackerman's voice came through, hesitant and shocked. "This is impossible. If it were the Soviets, how could they have landed on the moon without us noticing? They had no manned lunar capability. We didn't know either, with more than half our oxygen remaining. We had 2 options: follow the traces or return empty-handed." After a brief discussion, we agreed we couldn't leave without investigating. The importance of this item was obvious. There was no reason to retreat. We started the lunar rover, following the drag marks. Soon, an irregular outline appeared on the horizon, a spacecraft half buried in the lunar dust. As we approached, we saw the familiar yet jarring insignia on its hull, the Soviet flag. I can't explain why, but the first time I saw that ship, a cold sweat ran down my spine. Its structure was entirely different from ours, lacking familiar compartmentalization. The lines were strange, the proportions off. It looked like a failed imitation of a spacecraft. If there really were Russians there, they should have responded on the radio. But there was no response, their ship already destroyed. Without our help, they were doomed. We broadcast repeatedly, calling in English and Russian. "This is Explorer. We see you. Respond. Please respond." No reply. No signals. Not even static. Only deathly silence. We moved closer, step by step, toward the silent craft. Only then did we realize it was long abandoned. The hull was pocked with tiny meteorite impacts. The metal oxidized with age. The cockpit windows were obscured from the inside. Not a single glimmer of light escaped. The entire vessel resembled a coffin left in the vacuum. Heavy, quiet, untouchable. It took us a long while to finally pry open its airlock. Inside, it was a scene of chaos. Broken space food packets littered the floor, their packaging torn, remnants mixed with thick, viscous reddish-brown liquid splattered across the walls and deck. That wasn't food. I forced myself to suppress the thought. Bury it deep, but it lodged in my mind like shards of glass. Aching faintly, the cabin had only 2 seats, with some supplies and extraterrestrial sample containers stacked around. Yet we searched the entire ship and still couldn't find the memory module. On the wall near the airlock hung a single spacesuit. Only one. At that moment, the 2 of us exchanged a glance and simultaneously realized something. This ship was supposed to carry 2 people. Where was the other person? Where had he gone? There was no time to ponder. Our oxygen had dropped to the warning level. If we didn't return soon, it would be too late. We hurriedly retraced our steps, following our own footprints back to the lunar module. Then, midway, I suddenly stopped, staring at the lunar dust beneath my boots. I quietly asked Carver, "Did you notice? On our way here, we didn't see the traces of that satellite." He frowned, scanned the area, and muttered under his breath, "Damn, you're right. It should have been 30 degrees to our left. But now, it's like it vanished into thin air." Back in the lunar module, we immediately reported this to Ackerman. Moments later, Mission Control on Earth received the report as well. I could tell. They were completely stunned. That night, it was my turn for the first shift. Though technically night, the sun was still high on the horizon. We simply followed Earth-based schedules to maintain psychological rhythm. When it was time to rest, I had a dreamed eye in the dream. I walked alone across the lunar surface, chasing that fleeting light from the first day, step by step into boundless darkness. Ahead, a blurry shape emerged. That spacesuit from the Soviet spacecraft. It lay alone in the lunar dust, limbs twisted in a grotesque posture, as if violently contorted by some force. Step by step, I approached, unable to resist reaching out. Lifting the heavy sunshade, I froze. The face inside the spacesuit was my own, blood crusted across the features. Lips split, eye sockets hollow, two deep black voids staring at me. As if gazing from the depths of the cosmos, I woke with a start. That morning, the lunar module's radio began receiving unidentified interference. It wasn't from Ackerman, nor from Earth. It came from somewhere we couldn't determine. The sound seemed to seep from the vacuum in fine threads, inching into our channel. It was a drawn-out vowel, repeated, with regular but unnatural pauses. The IT wasn't a recording. Each iteration differed slightly, accompanied by faint static, yet horrifyingly cleared. We tried routing the signal to external speakers, but from any angle, it didn't sound like language. It was more like a call, a summoning. After eating, we set out again, determined to trace the unknown signal's source. The sun was slightly lower than the day before, lights slanting into the crater, shadows like silent waiting cracks that we knew that in a few days, this place would be plunged into total darkness. Without any chance of return, that we searched along the signal for nearly an hour. In the distance, finally, something appeared, a spacesuit lying quietly in the dust. The same one we had seen hanging inside the Soviet ship. Carver crouched, whispering, "Looks like we found our old friend." I didn't reply, just slowly approached. I knew I shouldn't get closer, shouldn't look, but my body seemed to act on its own. The instant my fingers touched the sunshade, the lifeless suit moved. IT suddenly raised an arm and grabbed me. Through the suit's resonant layer came a weak, trembling, almost shattered voice in Russian. "Pomogите. Help." We immediately dragged it back into the lunar module. The arm patch bore a name, Takov. He was a Soviet astronaut, extremely weak, oxygen deprived, yet still alive. Over the next few hours, he drifted in and out of consciousness, speaking incoherently. He couldn't remember who he was, the mission, why he was there, or even his former companions. Soon, Earth issued instructions from the White House, bring Takov back safely. That night, I dozed beside the observation window. When I opened my eyes again, I froze. The American flag, previously planted outside the lunar module, was gone. No footprints on the ground, no drag marks, nothing. It was as if the flag had never existed. First, I thought Takov had removed it, but there was no way he could have opened the module without us noticing. We requested to terminate the mission, explaining that the situation was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. But the response from Earth was cold and firm. Recovery of the data module takes precedence over all else. We fell silent, ultimately deciding to continue the search the next day. That night, I dreamed the same vision again. In the dream, the spacesuit lay quietly in the dust, and I was drawn toward it by some unseen force. Step by step, I woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. Sitting up, I saw Takov standing at the observation window, back to me, staring silently outside, his hands bound behind him. Carver sat on the bed behind him, watching. Takov slowly turned, walked to Carver, and stopped. The silence separated them, as if a vacuum lay between. I whispered, asking what he was doing. His lips moved slightly, murmuring something indistinct, perhaps they, or the voice. Then he lay down, sinking back into sleep. I stayed awake all night, eyes fixed on him, not daring to relax. The next morning, before departure, we thoroughly searched Takov again. Inside the lining of his spacesuit, we found a hand-drawn map. It was a topographic map of the crater, marked with an X, not far from our current location. Stranger still, it corresponded to the direction of the flash we had seen on the first day. Carver and I said little, immediately deciding to set out. Takov was left in the lunar module. Though the rover could carry 3 people, I insisted he stay behind. I leaned close to Carver and whispered, "I don't trust him." We couldn't find the module. The Soviet ship vanished, and suddenly he shows up here, innocent as can be, with a map pointing exactly to the spot. Too convenient. I don't trust him or that direction. Carver nodded, lowering his voice. "So what do we do with him?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but one thing is clear, we can't bring him back to Earth. There's no space in the lunar or command module. He knows it too. I can see it. He's known all along." We set out, following the direction marked on the map, driving into that unknown shadow. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon. the light dimming, and the lunar rover's headlights cut a path through the dust. Soon, we saw it. The strange structure that a pitch-black edifice stood silently amid the dust. About 3 meters tall, a symmetrical triangular pyramid. Its surface was unnaturally smooth, without seams, edges, or any reflection. As if made of some light-devouring metal, that we stopped the rover and stood before it, silent for a long moment. This was absolutely not a human-made object that we slowly circled it, taking a few photos, but the unease in our hearts only grew stronger, as if something was warning us to stay away. Then, suddenly, a low curse echoed through the radio that I whipped around and saw Carver frozen in place, eyes locked on the distance. Following his gaze, I saw it, under the beam of the lights. A familiar figure stood in the dust, a spacesuit, standing rigidly about 20 feet away. The nameplate on its chest was torn, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same one we had seen inside the Soviet ship. Its visor was open, revealing only darkness inside. Yet it stood there, with no wind, no support, nothing holding it up. Perfectly upright, my throat tightened. I was about to speak when a piercing static burst through my headset. Then, the voice came, low, distorted, like a whisper from a deep well. "You don't belong here." The tone was stiff, the rhythm unnatural, a sound that seemed part biological, part mechanical, resonating directly in the mind, not transmitted through radio, but drilled straight into thought. Before I could react, a blinding flash surged. The entire world tore into emptiness. When my vision returned, the spacesuit was gone. Carver's voice exploded in my headset, urgent, chaotic, almost hysterical. "We need to go." We leaped onto the rover and tore back to the lunar module like madmen. By the time we arrived, the sun had fully set, darkness thick as ink. Only the module's faint lights pulsing, gasping for air. I scanned the area. Takov, the Soviet, was crouched in a corner. Rage boiled in me. I wanted to interrogate that damned man. His hands were hidden behind him, as if concealing something that I was about to speak when it struck. A sharpened metal rod smashed against my helmet. The impact threw me backward, ears ringing, mind blank. I fell into the dust, vision spinning, and saw Carver and Takov grappling violently, dust swirling around them. The scene terrifying, gritting my teeth. I scrambled up, lunging with all my strength. Throwing him off, we crashed to the ground. Tangled together, I struggled to my feet. But he lunged first, hands gripping my suit, pressing me into suffocation. I saw him reaching for my helmet latch. If it opened, the next second I would suffocate in the vacuum. The last instant, I grabbed a sharp rock nearby and swung it hard at his helmet. A cracking sound. The visor split, the fissure spreading rapidly. Air hissed out through the gap. I rolled upright, instinctively seizing the bloodied metal rod. He lunged again, and I drove the rod into his chest. He groaned, collapsing onto me. Our helmets nearly touched. Before his final breath left him, he whispered, "He's not your friend. Follow the voice." His body twitched once, then went completely limp. I shoved him away and staggered toward Carver. He lay beside the lunar module, a terrifying tear across his thigh in the suit. Deep red blood was slowly being drawn out by the vacuum, thread by thread, dissipating into the thin, black air. I hastily dragged him inside, only to find the first aid kit gone. I pressed on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but it poured relentlessly from the tear. His face pale, lips trembling. He raised his head and struggled to say, "Soviet module, there's another medkit. You have to get it." I nodded, whispering, "Don't die, Carver. That's an order." He gave a faint smile and then passed out. I turned and set out. The distance from the lunar module to the Soviet module wasn't far, but it felt like a lifetime. Every step, I stared into the suffocating darkness around me. Each footfall felt like treading the unknown, as if something could leap from the shadows at any moment. Finally reaching the Soviet module, I saw the spacesuit that had hung on the wall was gone. I was not surprised, but still, a chill ran uncontrollably down my spine. I quickly retrieved the medical kit and turned back, moving faster than before. Yet in my mind, the words coiled like venom. "He's not your friend. Follow the voice." Takov's warning echoed in my mind, over and over, growing clearer with every step. I switched the radio back to that channel. the one where we first heard the strange sound. The static was still there, but no longer a vague echo that I heard myself muttering. Follow the voice. The voice seemed to guide me, yet also to lure me. Was that the voice Tarkov meant? The one he said belonged to someone not your friend? Who was it? Tarkov himself? Carver? Or Mission Control? I had no choice but to pursue the mystery that I started the rover, moving toward the source of the signal. The tires crushed the soft dust with almost no sound that I gripped the wheel, palms sweaty. Every minute felt as though unseen eyes were watching. After several minutes, I reached a small crater. The rover's headlights illuminated its bottom. At first, I couldn't make out its shape, just a reflection of light, like glass. No, stone. I carefully climbed down the crater wall, turning the headlight to maximum. The next moment, the light revealed the full scene. I froze. The rectangular black stone slab lay in the center, its surface icy and cold. Made of the same material as the triangular pyramid we had discovered before, on the slab lay a corpse. Its twisted limbs looked violently broken. Bones jutting beneath skin, posture unnatural, as if forced into some symbolic position. The eye sockets were empty. Nothing inside, just two deep black voids. As though its soul had been sucked away. I recognized it was Carver. He was dead. A small black box was stuffed into his mouth. Like some ritual offering. I reached for it and instantly recognized it. It was the satellite's black box. Something was terribly wrong. I stumbled out of the crater. Behind me, Carver seemed to stare with those hollow black eyes. I accelerated desperately. The dust kicked up by the rover seeming to bury that slab forever, and I knew Carver was dead. I had seen his body with my own eyes. Then, who was the Carver in the lunar module? The one who whispered, "We are friends," who called my name over the headset, patted my shoulder, worked alongside me? He wasn't Carver. On the way back, all I could hear in my mind was Tarkov's warning, "He's not your friend." Back in the lunar module, I noticed Tarkov's body was gone, but Carver was still there. He was lying there, still bleeding. But that wasn't Carver. It was some unknown entity. The moment it saw me, it spoke. "Finally, you're back. Are you all right?" The voice was still Carver's, familiar tone, familiar cadence. But I knew Carver was dead. His face unrecognizable. That thing kept speaking, in a gentle, concerned tone, asking if I was hurt. I forced my heartbeat down and quietly pulled the medkit from behind me, replying in a low voice. I brought it back. I couldn't let it know I had seen through its disguise, or that I had seen the missing Soviet corpse, and simply pretended to forget that I stopped its bleeding and bandaged the wound. Then I strapped it in and secured my own harness. I didn't tell it that I had found the black box. I didn't tell it that I had seen the real Carver. The moment the engines ignited, the module shuddered, cutting through the dust. The lower struts stayed on the lunar surface. The hull pierced the darkness of space like a bullet. I've said before, minutes in space feel like hours. But this time, the entire ascent felt stretched across a century. My stomach churned. I wanted to vomit, to faint. But I could do nothing. I couldn't let it discover. I knew the truth. I had to hold it together. I had to save Ackerman. The lunar orbit ship was still stable. Ackerman still there. We had maintained contact the whole way. But when we finally met, everything had changed. He was happy. Despite the turbulence, the mission had gone smoothly. But he didn't know. Carver wasn't Carver. I did. Without hesitation, I unbuckled my harness and shoved Ackerman toward the connecting module. That ghostly thing tried to follow. I lifted my leg and kicked hard at its visor. The glass shattered instantly. I closed the airlock. Ackerman panicked. He lunged, pinning me against the wall, his furious shouting exploding through the headset. "What the hell are you doing, Miller? Are you crazy?" I was slammed so hard the world went black, but I forced myself to resist, shouting hoarsely, "Go back. Don't open that hatch. Mike, that's not Carver. That thing is not Carver. Do you understand?" My voice tore through my throat. Ackerman froze. He was a battle-hardened man. Yet at that moment, his eyes welled up. Tears spilling over. I floated away from him, heading to the control panel, reaching out to initiate the final separation. But before I did, I couldn't resist one last glance back through the small window of the docking module. It was still there, that thing with Carver's face, motionless, staring at us. No expression flickered across its face. But those eyes, those were not human eyes. completely black. No sclera, no pupils, like two bottomless voids, its mouth opened, corners ripped at an unnatural angle, as if the facial muscles themselves had torn, emitting a shrill, piercing scream that we were in space. But that sound seemed to pierce straight into the soul. Then everything fell silent. The lunar module separated from the orbital ship, detaching from the docking port, drifting into endless darkness from that moment on. For the 3-day return trip, neither Ackerman nor I spoke a single word. Not one. After returning to Earth, we were immediately isolated in a special facility for months. No one offered any explanation for the mission, and I was never told the contents of the black box. Honestly, after all that, I didn't want to know. I only knew that the data inside could have ended the entire lunar program. Eventually, they let us go, but with one clear warning. This incident could never be mentioned again. Since that day, I never saw Lieutenant Ackerman again. Never. I thought it was over, until years later. My doorbell rang. 2 men in suits stood outside, expressionless, cold as stone. They claimed to be from a government agency whose name they could not disclose. After the usual small talk, one of them spoke suddenly, voice unnervingly calm. "Captain Miller, have you been in contact with Lieutenant Ackerman recently?" I shook my head. "Since the mission? No." "What?" They exchanged a glance. Then one of them said softly, "I'm afraid Ackerman's body was discovered yesterday afternoon in a nearby forest." For a moment, the world went black. I nearly collapsed into a chair. I wasn't particularly close to Ackerman, but we had trained together, survived hell together. Experiences like that don't need words. He was a true comrade, a true friend. Poor guy. How did he die? They paused, as if choosing words carefully. Finally, they said, "We're not certain, but all his limbs were broken, and his eyes were removed." I've already forgotten what the men in suits said next. It was that thing. The monster that killed Carver. I had thought we left it forever in the depths of space, drifting away with the lunar module. But it came down. Ackerman was dead, and next, will it come for me?